Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name is Councillor Adam Stokes and I'm Chairman of this board. Councillor Tom Smith, the Vice Chairman of the board, is also in attendance. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcasted live via the County Council's website, and all your comments will remain accessible online as the meeting recording remains on the website. And with this in mind, I'd like to welcome the members of the press and public who are watching this live. I'd like to welcome the Executive Councillors and the Executive Support Councillors who are attending our meeting today, and also welcome members of the Corporate Leadership Team who are present today. I would like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the doors behind you and leave the building through the reception into the front car park. We will then need to wait in the car park for further instructions. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting? Also, when invited to speak, can you please ensure that you switch on your microphone? Otherwise, those attending the meeting via Teams and members of the press and public listening to our meeting online won't be able to hear you. And please be aware that you need to speak directly into the microphones to be heard. The hearing loop is now activated. And requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman. So if you wish to speak during the meeting, can you please raise your hand and Councillor Tom Smith will make a note. We will try to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to ask questions and make contributions. However, I will close down the debate to ensure we keep to time. We will now move on to the formal agenda. So item 1, which is apologies for absence and replacement members. Emily, do we have any to report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Martin Kyle.
Thank you for that. Item 2, declarations of members' interests. Members of the board are reminded that they only need to declare any relevant interests which have not been declared on their DPI form. Do any members wish to declare an interest? No. Thank you for that. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of March 2024. This is to confirm and sign the minutes from the last meeting of the board on the 12th of March as a correct record, and these can be found on pages 5 to 12 of the agenda pack. Do we have a proposer for those minutes, please? Councillor Smith and Councillor Macy seconded. So all those in favour, please? That's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 4, which is announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Chief Officers. I do not have any announcements to make today. I'd like to point out we do have a busy agenda, and that includes consideration of 3 pre-decision items. I should therefore like to begin by asking those presenting reports to take those as read by members and only summarise key points and the type of input expected by the board. Introductions of the reports will be capped at 5 minutes to ensure we have sufficient time to consider and debate. Do we have any Executive Councillor announcements? No. Chief Officer announcements? No. Thank you. So that's item done. So we'll now move on to item 5, consideration of call-ins. Emily, do we have any?
No, none received, Chairman.
Thank you. And then item 6, consideration of councillor calls for action. Emily, again, do we have any?
No, none received.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we'll now move on to the first substantive item, which is item 7, the Household Support Fund grant utilisation, the 1st of April 2024 to the 30th of September 2024. This is a pre-decision scrutiny item found on pages 13 to 38 of the agenda pack, invites the board to review and comment on a report to the Leader of the Council and the Executive Council for Resources, Communications and Commissioning, seeking approval for the allocated funding of 5.46 million from the Household Support Fund to be utilised to assist vulnerable households with essential expenses, as well as approval for funding to be allocated to schools, early year providers and eligible care leavers in supported living accommodation, targeting to back specific cohorts and to distribute the remainder of the funding to district councils based on the indices of multiple deprivation to support application-based initiatives and locally determined schemes tailored to community needs. The report is due to be considered by the Leader of the Council on between the 29th of April and the 3rd of May, and the views of the board were reported to the Leader of the Council as part of the consideration of the item. Our actions are that we consider the attached report to determine whether the board supports the recommendations to the leader of the council as set out, and agree any additional comments to be passed on to the leader in relation to this item. So the report will be presented by Mark Popplewell, Strategic Finance Lead, Children's Services. So over to you, Mark, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you'll be aware, in the spring 24 budget, the government announced the continuation of the Household Support Fund. So this was 421 million nationally, and it was for the period April to September 24. As the Chair said, it's there to provide that financial support to vulnerable households most in need who are struggling to afford household essentials, including energy, water bills, food and wider essentials. So the scheme can be delivered through various routes, whether that's being proactive, application-based or issuing to third-party organisations. This is the 5th round of the programme, with the most recent 12-month programme ending at the end of March, and members will be aware of prior decision reports having come to this committee before. So the allocation for this 6-month period is the 5.4 million, and the report sets out how that is to be used for the benefits of Lincolnshire residents. As with earlier rounds, the County Council's collaboration with district councils is required to effectively deliver the scheme, ensuring that we maximise this to the most vulnerable households that we can identify and engage with. In terms of the pace of this, clearly it's only a 6-month project, and obviously the announcements were only on the 6th of March. Therefore, we need to operate with pace. We have considered alternatives, but we feel that prior arrangements should continue, but with one amendment. This amendment relates to the Household Support Fund allocation for housing benefit only cohort, and for that not to be carried forward since the cost of living scheme payment that they were not entitled to has now ended at the end of last financial year. So it is recommended that the funding is continued to be allocated to schools and early years providers via the children eligible for the free school meals and early years pupil premium. This is a very rapid way to get funding out to those most in need. 64% of the overall funding will be going out through that route via a single payment via this proposal. And in most cases, schools will be issuing vouchers to those families. It's estimated that 32,000 children and young people will be receiving support through that route, so it's very good coverage. Other mechanisms in terms of how we're delivering this, 1% will go to our eligible care leavers, and so obviously supporting our corporate parenting role. And then the remainder, 34%, will be allocated to district councils using the IMD deprivation factor. And there'll be 2 elements to that. So there'll be the application scheme, which is a mandatory element. So 1.8 million will be going through this approach in terms of application base and also locally determined schemes that will be set by the districts themselves. We need to make sure it's very clear rationale to ensure the public can engage in this and also to prevent further hardship for them. And a delivery plan will be submitted following the decision on the 10th of May. Concludes it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions or comments on this report? Councillor Carrington, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much indeed for that presentation, a very interesting report. When the Chairman was introducing the item, he mentioned the indices of deprivation. I just wonder whether we have obviously some very important urban areas in Lincolnshire, but we are also in many areas a very, very rural county, and in rural areas quite often there's a great deal of hidden deprivation. So my question really is, are we absolutely satisfied that the mechanisms by which we're going to distribute this very, very valuable assistance are rural proofed? In other words, that they will allow us to seek out in rural areas as well as urban areas those who are in most need.
Thank you for that. So as part of our working group, all the district colleagues are part of that, and that was something that we've been deliberating and debating for some time. And actually, as a group, they felt there were the fair distribution, considering sort of East Lindsey and the pockets that you're probably referring to in that, circa about 34% of that overall 100% that's going to the districts was going to that area. Lincoln also was a high area as well due to the inner city deprivation. So yes, that was debated, and where there are challenges in terms of districts getting spending out as well, there is that consideration prior to the end of the scheme as well to say, okay, then are there pockets that we feel that we need additional support with, and we have open conversation between the districts to manoeuvre that as well. So yes, it is considered, but it's clearly no approach will be perfect, but it's a fair apportionment, and I know all the districts are signed up to that as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any further comments or questions from the board? No, I've got just one, and that's with regards to the increased demand for this money. I'm just wondering if we can meet that demand, if that makes sense, because obviously it will take more staffing to go through all the claims and etc. So I'm just wondering if we can meet those.
That's right, yeah. Obviously, it was alluded to in the report, wasn't it, about obviously the cost of living ending, so there is potentially that growth. At this moment in time, we haven't really been able to quantify what that means, but with it being a quantum that we need to live within, it'll be something the districts will be closely monitoring and looking at those target groups that are most vulnerable. Administration element, that is something, again, that we want to try and minimise as much as possible, because it's about getting the monies out to those individuals. Again, as a local authority, that's something that we are monitoring and hopefully trying to facilitate with our district colleagues to minimise that to a lower level. But no, that is something that we are, as a working group, will be monitoring to make sure that actually money is deployed, but also recognising that there could be increased demands as a result of this. But it is the same quantum as what we've seen, but obviously half of that from what we've seen in Household Support Fund 4. So it's the same quantum that we're working to, unfortunately.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Any further comments, questions? No? So I will move that the board supports the recommendations to the Leader of the Council detailed on pages 16 and 17 of the report, and that our comments, as have been captured by Kiara, be shared with the Leader ahead of the consideration of the timetable. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Smith. All those in favour, please? That is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. So now we'll move on to item 8, which is the Deeping School Leisure Centre. This is a pre-decision scrutiny item, and this can be found in the supplementary pack distributed and published on the 23rd of April. The report to the Executive presents the results of the expressions of interest from a third-party purchaser with a viable plan for refurbishment and operation of the leisure centre process, and seeks a final decision from the Executive on how to proceed regarding the future of the leisure centre building. Ultimately, it is sought to address the need to finalise and formalise the occupation of the Deeping School and to address delays in granting the statutory academy lease, primarily due to issues concerning the liability of the Deeping's Leisure Centre building, which forms part of the school site. The report is due to be considered by the Executive on the 8th of May 2024. The views of the board were reported to the Executive by our designated scrutiny officer, and our actions are that we, 1, consider the attached report to determine whether the board supports the recommendation to the Executive as set out in the report, and 2, agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive in relation to this item. This report will be presented by Jane Sowerby, Warrington, Assistant Director of Corporate Property. Over to you, please, Jane.
Thank you, Chairman. That was an excellent summary of the report. You stole my thunder a little bit, to be honest. Morning, everyone. So, yeah, just to reiterate, I'll keep this really brief. The purpose of the paper, really, is to report the results of the expression of interest process undertaken in the summer 2023. And as the Chairman rightly said, to seek a final decision from the Executive as to how the Council should proceed regarding the outcome of the process. So just to take, I think, everyone back to the purpose of the process, really. So the purpose of the expression of interest process was to seek a sustainable and viable bid from a purchaser for the Deeping's Leisure Centre building, who was able to refurbish the building, acquire the building and operate the building as a leisure centre, bringing it back into use for the community. Any potential purchasers, as we went through that expression of interest process, were asked also to ensure that their proposals wouldn't interfere with the running of the school, given that the leisure centre building is almost snap bang in the middle of the school site. So one applicant submitted a bid. This was the Deeping's Community Leisure Centre Community Interest Company. And I would say it was evident from the significant effort that was put into the bid that the organisation has an incredibly strong desire to reopen the leisure centre for the benefit of the wider community. The evaluation of the business case, however, did highlight several issues that do require addressing in order to meet the requirements of both that sustainability element and the viability element before any funding could be considered for release and disposal of the freehold completed. So the issues have been highlighted within the report, so that's section 1.2 to 1.27, and have formed the basis of the recommendations that have been made to the executive. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Do we have any comments or questions on this report? Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chairman. How high is the risk of judicial review into this action that we are proposing to undertake with respect to the Subsidy Control Act? And if one is made, what would be the approximate cost to LCC to defend itself? Thank you.
Can I hand over to my colleague, Paula? Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that question. In terms of the application of the Subsidy Control Act, the advice has been to class this particular financial assistance as a service of public economic assistance. That's a route that's permitted under the Act, and the Subsidy Control Act principles do not need to be fulfilled in full in order to pursue that particular route. So if all of the recommendations are fulfilled and the money is given to the KIC, then that's the route that will be followed. Therefore, the risk of judicial review, that particular route is unlawful, would be low.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dilks, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I, before I comment, actually declare that the Deepings Leisure Centre is in the county division. I represent Deepings East, as well as in my South Kestervan district ward of Deepings St James. My children, along with thousands of others in my community, learned to swim at Deepings Leisure Centre, and I have campaigned to get the leisure centre reopened, if possible. And I was a founder member of the community group mentioned, working to that end, but I resigned from that to avoid conflict of interest prior to this issue coming to this board just under a year ago. Having made those declarations, I would like to thank the Member for Property, Councillor Brutroyd in particular, and in particular the leader of the council, Councillor Hill, for the common sense approach that has been adopted to this ongoing challenge in doing what's possible to restore what my communities had and benefited from for 47 years before the leisure centre was closed. So I clearly welcome and will be voting. I don't think my declaration bars me for voting, but I will be welcoming, and I do really strongly welcome the common sense approach. I mean, if the county council can assist in overcoming the issues, or if the all the partners working together can overcome the challenges that I recognise, and the caveat should be in there, to see the leisure centre reopened, frankly, at a cost to the county council of, what would be half of the expected demolition costs. It has to be a win-win for everyone. So I do thank the county for that attitude. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Do we have any further from the board? Councillor Marfleet, please.
Thank you. The sooner this is resolved, the better. I mean, it's quite sad, really, because actually every child should be able to swim. And here we are with a facility that's in effect fallen into such disrepair. I mean, the lesson learnt is not to let things. I'm a big believer, don't let things fall into the state of such a mess. We have to, economic development thrives better if you keep things nurturing along rather than let them fall into this sort of state. And yeah, I mean, the swimming is an essential part of growing up, and in a developed world like ours, every child really should be able to swim. But you know what? We've got to get this case resolved. We've got to move on. And it is a tricky one because technically it's not necessarily a county council's function. We've just ended up with the building, and that makes it really quite difficult. But we've got a conclusion here, so hopefully we can sort of move on and actually the team comes to the table and develops it and picks it all up, and we support them the best we can. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have any further from the board? No. So from the chair, I will move that the board supports the recommendations to the executive detailed on pages 6 to 7 of the report, and ask that our comments, as these have been captured by Chiara, Scrutiny Officer, be shared with the executive for its consideration on the 8th of May 2024. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Dilks. All those in favour, please? That's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item number 9, which is commissioning of the Education and Early Years Administration System. This report to the Executive Council for Children's Services, Community Safety, Procurement and Migration is on pages 39 to 50 of the agenda pack. The report proposes the recommissioning of the Council's Education and Early Years Management System, Synergy, as the current contract expires on the 30th of June 2024. Synergy is a comprehensive suite of tools that support various statutory duties related to ensuring children of statutory school age receive education. These duties include managing admissions, free school meals, early years provision, children's attendance, tracing cases of children missing education, and violating school census returns. Since Synergy operates effectively and the market for such systems is limited, the recommendation is to procure the existing system under a compliant framework procedure, aiming to maintain and enhance its current success. The report is due to be considered by the Executive Council between the 7th and the 17th of May, and the views of the board were reported to the Executive by a designated scrutiny officer. So our actions are that we consider the attached report and determine whether the board supports the recommendations to the Executive Council as set out in the report, and to agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Councillor in relation to this item. The report will be presented by Leanne Fotherby, Interim Commercial and Procurement Manager, and John O'Connor, Head of Education Support Children's Education. So I think we're starting with Leanne for this, please. Or we'll start with John. John, please.
Wow, that is comprehensive. Yeah, so we've come to the end of our 6-year contract with our current incumbent, and what we've done is looked at all of the functions that we require of a system to do, recognising that the marketplace is not great for us to go to, but we still need to do due diligence as to what we're looking to procure. So we've asked each of the teams that were involved to draw up their statement of requirements, and then we've gone to a Yorkshire Purchasing Organisations framework to look for other software providers that are available. And on that framework there were 2. We tested both of those providers against our statement of requirements, and we came out with the conclusion that our current incumbent was still fit for purpose for what we need the system to do. And also by going with a current incumbent, we don't incur onboarding costs, which can be quite expensive when starting with a brand new system. So we did consider a range of options which are in the paper themselves. So if anybody's got any questions about the system, I'm quite happy to answer those. And Leanne will field any questions that you have about procurement. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Kendrick, please.
It's not so much a question, Chairman, just as to say, to the best of my knowledge, I can't recall we've had any issues brought to the attention of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee in relation to this system. And obviously, this is a very pragmatic move to make. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Do we have any further comments on this item? No, I see none as well. So I will move from the board, from the chair, that the board supports the recommendations to the Executive Council detailed on pages 41 to 42 of the report. And I ask that our comments are, as captured by Chiara, Scrutiny Officer, be shared with the Executive Council ahead of her consideration timeline. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Kendrick. So all those in favour, please? Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 10, which is performance of the corporate support services contract. You can find this report on pages 51 to 56 of the reports pack and serves as the final assessment of Serco's performance against the key performance indicators outlined in the corporate support services contract for the review period spanning October 22, 23 even, to March 24. It also marks the conclusion of the CSS contract, which concluded on the 31st of March 24, following a 9-year duration. Our actions are to review and comment on the performance of the corporate support services contract and provide feedback and challenge as required. And this report will be presented by Ant Hobnon, Corporate Support Services Contract Manager. Over to you, Ant, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. So, as you've just heard, this is the final report for the Corporate Support Services contract, which has concluded now after 9 years. And the report takes the usual format of an exception report. So it provides you just the headlines of what's happened and where we got to. I won't go through all the abbreviations, etc. So we have an overall performance summary table that outlines how many key performance indicators the contract was operating, and we had a small drop in those in November 23. We had 38 before that, and we ran with 33 for the last 5 months of the contract for reasons I'll explain a little later in this presentation. And the report concerns itself with informing you of those targets that were either where only the minimum service level was achieved or below minimum service or mitigation was agreed. And again, I can report that during the final 6 months of the contract, none of the targets failed to meet, were below the target service level, and therefore no ambers or reds were reported for the period. And we had some exceptions. So there were 2 key exceptions in the customer service centre. We have had ongoing issues with the Avaya A3, sorry, not Avaya, with Anywhere 365 specific to the customer services centre. And as a result of that, there have been some inability for the corporate support, the customer service centre to report effectively against some of the KPIs, and therefore some of the targets were marginally missed. However, we have been able to continue to provide an effective service from the CSC. In spite of that, has been an ongoing issue. So A and B identifies the areas where, since the launch of A365, there has been a need to manually manage and respond to emails instead of them being routed by Anywhere 365. This is receiving urgent attention, and we will be attending to that as quickly as possible. And so these have impacted the ability for the CSC to perform effectively against the target of calls that are abandoned calls, and also the contacts that were responded to on the email side. Moving on to item 6, we have identified in this report, especially as it's now the end of the contract, that KPIs were effectively and actively managed throughout the contract, and that during that time, whilst we had 33 active key performance indicators at the end of the contract, they were subject to a continuous process of review and to ensure that they remained effective and appropriate to the contract activities. And I'm going to go through all of them, but as you can see here, we had 14 deletions of existing contract KPIs, and we also had 12 new or replacement KPIs during that time. So it was an active process of ensuring that performance was managed and delivered to a high standard. Also, and directly connected with the end of the contract, as a result of Change Control Notice 129, we also suspended 5 of the people management KPIs for the final 5 months of the contract, as mentioned earlier. And the reason for this was that there was some backlogged activity that was required to catch up with, and also a lot of work building up to the transfer of the staff back into the council, and it was agreed that it would be most helpful if we did not drive Serco to managing reporting on the KPIs, which is quite time consuming, and instead to focus their efforts on an effective and smooth transfer back to the council. And this was achieved, and that was a very successful outcome as a result of that. There was no difficulty for the council. We didn't incur any problems or issues as a result of suspending those KPIs for the final 5 months. And as it says here, there were, of course, 2 of them that were very critical. Payroll recipients paid on the payment date, always a one to watch. And those remained active until the very last day of the contract. As this board had previously requested some years ago, we were asked to review and keep an eye on green KPIs. So we use a tool called Green Trend Analysis, which you'll see here set out in item 7. Green Trend Analysis, the purpose of which is to identify where KPIs that are meeting their targets to determine what sort of direction of travel they're going in, whether there are any likely difficulties coming up. So it's a sort of radar, really. And this was requested in the past once we were doing much better and KPIs were performing to a high standard. So this identifies the scores that KPIs that meet the TSL, i.e. are green, have, and whether those over a period of time are showing any kind of directional trend. And the purpose being to identify where and if possibly those might lead to difficulties during the period of the contract. None of them, as it says here, were on track to fail before the end of the contract. And indeed, at this point in time, at the end of the contract, end of February, that's where the reporting goes up to, 88% of the green KPIs were stable or improving. It's actually no change because of the 5 that we removed, so it was 83 before, but that was still a stable picture, and at no point were we in danger of witnessing those greens turning to amber at any time. So there was a useful monitoring tool, and it kept us abreast of the situation regarding direction of travel. Item 8 just sets out the number of abatement points that were incurred by Serco during the course and lifetime of the contract. You've seen this many times before, and it sets out how this works. So table 2 gives you, think of it more as a visual representation because it's the entire 9 years on one chart. So it's fairly condensed, but the idea is to give you a visual sense of how many abatement points had applied during the time. And as you can see, there was an awful lot of action in the first few years of the contract, and then things calmed down substantially. In recent years, very few abatement points were necessary as a result of much improved performance. So in conclusion, this is the end of the contract. So this is the final review period. And obviously, as you'd expect, the most critical part of that final period was a smooth and effective transition to next stages for the various elements of the contract. And as you're aware, I'm sure, 2 of the elements in-sourced to the council, finance and human resources. And IMT has continued on an extension for a short period of up to 2 years, and the CSC has been re-awarded as a new contract. A representative from Serco hasn't attended today, and they just asked me to pass on to you this short message from them under section 9, which I won't read out, but you can read for yourself. And that's a quick tour of...
Okay, thank you for that. Do we have any comments or questions on this item, please? No. I've just got one. With regards to the CSC being let on a new contract, will we be retaining the current KPIs that had, or will there be new ones being remodelled to have a look at the performance going forward?
Okay, good question. And of course, being a new contract, we've taken the opportunity to revisit the KPIs. And so the KPIs will be similar, but they're not the same.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any further comments or questions from the board? No. So our actions were to review and comment on the performance of the corporate support service contract, but the proposal is that I move that the report be endorsed and our satisfaction be recorded on the performance achieved and reported. And I ask that feedback provided by the board during debate be captured and passed on to the relevant officers and portfolio holders. If you agree, please raise your hand. Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So we'll now move on to item 11, which is the scrutiny panel's approval of terms of reference of scrutiny reviews. And this report is found on pages 57 to 62 of the agenda pack. As per the County Council's constitution, the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board is requested to approve the terms of reference for the 2 ongoing reviews conducted by the separate scrutiny panels, along with their retrospective completion dates. I would like to remind board members that the TOR for Scrutiny Panel A and B have previously been presented to the board, and that the panels have approved these with no amendments. So our actions are 1, to endorse the terms of reference and completion date of review of Young Carers Scrutiny Panel A as set out in Appendix A to this report, and 2, to endorse the terms of reference and completion date of the review of traffic management policy for Lincolnshire Scrutiny Panel B as set out in Appendix B to this report. This report will be presented by Nigel West, Head of Democratic Services and Statutory Scrutiny Officer. Over to you, Nigel, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Not much more for me to say, I don't think, really. But as you know, we've set up two reviews for the Council's scrutiny panels. Scrutiny Panel A is reviewing young carers, and Scrutiny Panel B is reviewing the Council's traffic management policy. In accordance with our constitution, this report simply seeks endorsement from the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board for the terms of reference and the completion dates of those 2 reviews. Appendix A to the report provides the terms of reference for the Young Carers review, and Appendix B outlines the terms of reference for the Traffic Management Policy review, as well as their respective completion dates. So you should have everything that you need. But it is proposed that the final report for the traffic management review goes to Highways in July, and the Young Carers final report is expected to be ready for Children's Scrutiny Committee on the 18th of October, for the 18th of October meeting. Happy to answer any questions, Chairman.
Thank you for that, Nigel. Do we have any comments or questions, please, of this? Councillor Kendrick, please.
Just to say, Chairman, I'm looking forward to receiving the report, because young carers is sometimes an overlooked or underappreciated part of our community. So I'm looking forward to that report in October. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Councillor Marfleet, please.
It on Appendix B on the traffic management, it does talk about an in-depth review of the existing traffic management policy. And yet we're going to have it back in and wrapped up by June, or July rather. I mean, how in-depth are you going here? Because I can think of many villages that could do with their speed limits being put back to the new entrance of the village because of the expansion of houses and things, which are currently not aligned. So are we going in depth, or are we just going on the sort of out of school zones and all the other bits of information? What is the meaning of in depth?
I think that's covered by the paragraph on exclusions from the review. I think it says there that the review will focus on the traffic management policy implemented in Lincolnshire. All other types of policy outside the highway sector will be excluded from the review. So it will concentrate on the traffic management policy, I think, and it will be as in depth as the panel require based on this terms of reference. I hope that.
We'll see what comes back.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? Councillor Brooks, please.
I'm just, thank you, as Chairman of Highways and Transport Scrutiny. This is, as I envisaged it was going to be, and I don't know whether it's the overhead term of traffic management policy, which perhaps might be causing a bit of confusion, because that's all the policies contained within the traffic management policy. Within traffic management policy, there is a speed limit policy and other policies for outside of schools, and they are looking at all of those policies under the umbrella of traffic management policy, and I didn't know whether that was causing some confusion, but they will be looking at all of that. They have been looking at these things already. They've been meeting Scrutiny Panel B and taking these items. The starting pistol is not going off now with the approval of these terms of reference. So I just thought it was important to clear that up. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's how I understood it as well, that everything was in that. So is there any further comments or questions? Oh, Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to try and put Councillor Marfleet's mind at rest, the Chairman of the Traffic Management and the Scrutiny Committee has very kindly allowed me to be a witness on a number of occasions for it. And they have looked in detail at speed limit, which is one. They have looked at the issue of how disabled parking outside of people's properties who have no drives is going to function, because that's something I requested for a while, and I know others have as well. They've also looked at weight limits in quite a number of detail. I obviously haven't seen the final report because it's not there yet, but I certainly look forward to it. And it's that when they were having these discussions, they certainly were very detailed and certainly weren't quick discussions. One committee I sat in for some of it, I think we were on one issue on one particular part of the speed limit policy. I think they were discussing it for about an hour and a half. So it certainly hasn't been a, shall I say, light touch. It's been very detailed, and I look forward to the full report, but just to try and put Councillor Marfleet's mind at rest as much as I can.
Councillor Marfleet, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I mean, I'm only really sort of questioning it from a public perception here, because in effect, when I go around parish council meetings, speeding traffic through villages and all the other issues is a concern. And what we've got to make sure is that when we do release this document into the public, it actually, in some sense, takes on board what actually the public get quite annoyed about is speeding. And I know that we all know that a lot of it is localism in the local areas that are razzing through villages without respect for communities. But it is a public thing that we are looking at, and whether we know the terminology or not, it's actually what the public think of this whole concept and what we're doing.
Yeah, I can fully understand that, Councillor Marfleet. Do you have any further comments or questions? No. So I will suggest that hereby endorse, that we as a board endorse the terms of reference and completion dates for reviews. For number 1, the review of the young carers by Scrutiny Panel A as outlined in Appendix A to this report, and 2, the review of the traffic management policy for Lincolnshire by Scrutiny Panel B as detailed in Appendix B to this report. If you can raise your hand if you agree, please. Thank you, that is unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 12, which is the Scrutiny Committee work programmes, and you will find this report on pages 63 to 76 of the agenda pack. It is this board's primary responsibility is to oversee the work programmes of other scrutiny committees, ensuring satisfaction with each committee's overall work programme and planned activities, rather than engaging in detailed discussions on specific items. The report provides us with an update on the activity undertaken by the Adults and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee and the Health Scrutiny Committee for Lincolnshire. So the report invites us to review and comment on the contents of the report, and 1, record our satisfaction with the activity undertaken, and 2, endorse the activity plans for 2024. So the report will be presented in 2 parts, and we'll start with the Adults and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee, and that will be Councillor Marfleet, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Past activities, referring to pages 67, 68 of the report, I would like to update on the 4 items considered yesterday. The first item was the intermediate care review of winter situations. This report sets out a range of activities aimed at reducing admissions to hospital facilitating discharge from hospitals and in general promoting independence. The activities include the hospital avoidance response team, active recovery beds, the hospital discharge reablement service and the community connector scheme. In spite of the challenges of winter, these outcomes of these services have been positive, which the committee noted. Just on that point, the other thing that we did raise is that every winter is different. This year has been particularly wet. Previous years have been particularly snowy or particularly frosty. And our main concern was that in some sense, some of those services responded well and were very well utilised, and others were less necessarily utilised. So we just made really ensuring that there was flexibility in both budgeting and the services to make sure that it adapts to the winter pressures that sort of, whether it comes from excessive cold weather or excessive snow and the impact from those. And they ensured us that they were and had flexibility to change accordingly. NHS Health Check service is a statutory duty whereby people aged between 40 and 74 are offered a health check once every 5 years, which focuses on identifying heart diseases and 2 types of diabetes risk, type 2 rather. The healthy checks are currently provided by GP practices who are paid a small fee for individual for invitations issued, plus a set fee for each completed health check. This year's budget is 558,000, increasing to 798,000, in effect nearly equivalent to about 3.5 million over 5 years. The committee supported a proposal to the executive on the 8th of May 2024 to recommission the service. The committee welcomes the future potential for health checks being undertaken digitally, which we see as a game changer. That way it can all be done straight to the phone, questions answered and responded, and actually signposts and everything else. It really is the future for this service, but it's in pilot schemes and we're not there yet, and it would be quite nice to know what questions are actually asked. But that's happening in other areas. Although currently, while that is all being shaped up, nationally the committee acknowledges that the GP model has several benefits, but alternative provision could be explored. For example, offering the services to pharmacists or to supermarkets, because the reality is with the GP model is that if you can't get off work between 9 and 5 to go to a GP surgery, then you ain't going to do a health check. And people off work might mean that, you know, it means that you have to take a holiday to go and have a health check just because you can't get back to work because of the requirements. So it could be done through pharmacists or maybe supermarkets. So other options should be explored on that and see where we go. We have supported the plans, though, for the regular contract, but review must be paid attention to with the fact that the digital solution is coming forward, but that is provisioned in the procurement contract. Next one was externally provided buildings-based daycare. Daycare in Lincolnshire is provided both in-house and by external providers. This item focuses on the external provision and sets out a proposal to the executive in May to procure a contract for 2 years until 2026, pending a wider review of daycare provisions, which is referred to as day opportunities. The contract value is around 2.8 million and currently provides support for 226 people through 26 contracts, with certain people receiving intensive one-to-one support. The committee supported the recommendations to the executive to extend the contract to allow for an in-depth review of all provisions. The committee recorded its initial thoughts on the future services, such as importance of personalisation, making day opportunities accessible by public transport where possible, in effect trying to support a more community hub approach, which is linked and accessed by public transport, and support the development of volunteers. Perhaps might raise that to the whole Lincolnshire County Council's volunteer approach, that it all becomes perhaps a bit more joined up, and if you want to go into the world of adults, then you'll be guided accordingly, or if you wanted to go into the world of children, you could be guided accordingly, and as well as expanding the ways those wishing to pay for these services, so that not only do we make an offer, if you are accessed for the needs or an access for finance, actually you can pay for whichever service you want quite easily, and it's very flexible and welcoming to everybody. Finally, Health Watch. Lincolnshire, the County Council is required to make arrangements for a local Health Watch service which aims to provide communities with a voice on their health and social care services. In Lincolnshire, Health Watch is provided by Health Watch Links under an arrangement which expires on the 30th of September 2024, and this arrangement cannot be extended. The committee supports a recommendation to the Executive on the 4th of June 2024 to procure the service for a 5.5-year contract term with a projected budget of £310,000 each year. The committee's comments made to reference to the emphasis on the outcomes of their achievements and sharing information, as well as provider aimings for a balance of activities between focusing on health, NHS and social care, Lincolnshire County Council. I think the other areas which we were aligned to was making sure that the way that they measure some of their hits on their websites were actually aligned correctly. It seemed to have one massive amount of hits, and if you actually, it was about 90,000 hits per quarter, so if you times that by 4, gave you 360,000 hits per year, which in real terms means that half the population of Lincolnshire has got an issue about the health and social care and is looking at Health Watch to solve their issues. I don't think that's quite the case, actually, but I think it does perhaps need to just make sure that the way that actually these things are measured and supported is actually true and reflective to the situation. And actually the only other comment would be to make sure that in effect it is there, but are they, we are independent, by the way, we are not to interfere to Health Watch. It's up to them to actually do their own sort of what they want to do. We are just in effect the commissioner of actually making sure that there is a service out there. That's that.
Okay, thank you. We'll come to questions in a minute. We'll just go to Councillor Macy for the Health Scrutiny Committee, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and I'll take the report as read. Referring to pages 73 and 74 of the report, I would like to update on 3 items considered last Wednesday. Starting with the NHS dental services in Lincolnshire. The committee receives regular updates on NHS dental services in Lincolnshire. Whilst dental services are commissioned locally, they are provided under a national contract. As part of this contract, there have been initiatives to try to keep dentists working for the NHS, such as the new patient premium. However, currently 75% of adults and 60% of under 17s in Lincolnshire do not have access to an NHS dentist. There is, however, some good news. An NHS dentist practice is opening in Mablethorpe, which the committee welcomed, together with improvements. However, since July last year, 4 NHS dentist practices in Lincolnshire have now terminated their NHS contracts, and the committee recorded their concerns on this. We'll be taking a further update in 6 months. Moving on to urgent and emergency care, the long-standing NHS standard for urgent and emergency care is that 95% of people will be treated, transferred or discharged within 4 hours of their arrival at A&E or an urgent treatment centre. Since the pandemic, NHS England has been setting recovery targets for this 4-hour standard. For example, 76% by March 2024 and 78% by March 25. Whilst the Lincolnshire system has only met 76% of the target consistently in the last year, there have been improvements, with the target being reached at times during the year. The committee noted the improvements over the last year, but acknowledged that the Lincolnshire system has more to do to improve the service for patients. An item will be scheduled during the autumn of 2024 on the Lincolnshire system's winter plan for next winter. United Lincolnshire Hospitals update. This item provided an update on a broad range of activities. Most importantly, we learned that the waiting times for elective care are reducing. For example, as of March 2024, there are no longer any patients waiting longer than 78 weeks for their treatment at ULHT. The Trust indicated it was on course to eliminate waits over 65 weeks by September of this year and waits over 52 weeks by March 2025, as required by NHS England. There are still significant waits for patients, but represent an improvement compared to just after the pandemic, when 2-year waits were recorded. The report also included some positive developments, such as the plans for the redevelopment of the A&E department at Pilgrim Hospital and a new endoscopy suite at Lincoln County Hospital, between them representing a capital investment of around £40 million. The committee concluded by welcoming ULHT's progress in the last year in eliminating waits of over 78 weeks and the plan for further reducing waiting times for elective care and other improvements over the last year, such as its capital investments. Moving on to future activity, I would like to highlight a couple of items on the committee's agenda in the coming months on pages 74 to 75. On the 12th of June, the committee is considering the Urgent Treatment Centre strategy, which is being developed by the NHS following a review of these centres. We are uncertain what form the review is going to take, but there is some concern that there may be proposals for reducing the opening hours of the urgent treatment centres overnight. I stress that this review excludes the Grantham Urgent Treatment Centre, which is the subject of a separate item on the 12th of June, looking at its progress since it opened in November 2023. Also on the 12th of June, we're expecting an item on the outcome of the Humber Acute Services Review, where we expect to consider a decision by the NHS to remove services such as overnight emergency surgery and trauma activity from Scunthorpe General Hospital, affecting patients in the northwest of the county, with a potential to increase activity at Lincoln County Hospital. The committee's response to the consultation in December of last year did not support these proposals. I would add that new regulations have been in force since January of this year, removing the rights of health scrutiny committees to make referrals to the Secretary of State. These have been replaced by ministerial intervention powers. In theory, any individual or organisation can request that the Secretary of State intervene, but in practice, a number of conditions would need to be met before the Secretary of State would consider a request as valid. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you for both of those reports. Councillor Lee, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about adult scrutiny because I was at the meeting yesterday. I felt it was a really useful, positive meeting. On the intermediate care, the social work side of hospital discharges, I think that's some of the money that LCC money that's the best spent I've ever seen. It frees up hospital beds, which there's huge pressure on those, and it also offers often short-term support for people who only need a bit of support for a few weeks. So, you know, it's a really, really positive thing. I think it actually makes a difference. You can see the difference that makes to people's lives, getting them out of hospital instead of them just laying in hospital beds. The second thing, the health checks. First of all, I asked for it to be noted for the record my concerns just about the recommendation about digitalisation. I do support it, but I think it comes with a, pardon the pun, a health check, because first of all, not everyone can access digital things. You might be old and not have the skills to do that, or actually there's evidence as well that people who are poor, who might not be able to afford a digital collection, actually they might be the ones that are in most need of health checks and preventative work. So I do have some concerns about pushing digitalisation. It's fine for the people it's fine with, but it's not fine for everybody. We also voiced concerns about the capacity issues with GPs. I think anyone who's ever tried to get an appointment would echo that one. We talked about how well the health checks were publicised by the GPs. And we also, there was a strong feeling about having these health checks in other places like supermarkets and pharmacies, but dare I say too, Councillor Boutroyd, in libraries and places like that, community facilities. So, but on the whole, positive thing, and I think it was a really positive meeting yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Marfleet, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose two comments really, and it's got nothing to do with sort of agenda items and such. As a committee, when we do put recommendations forward to the executive, sometimes it is, there's not a lot of time between our committee and the executive meeting, and we put, everyone reads these documents, everybody sort of puts a lot of time in to sort of contribute, and we put sort of ideas forward. And sometimes I just feel that those ideas are sort of left because basically it could, in some sense, do with when something's put forward, like an officer actually adding further information to it to add weight. If you're not careful, we sort of put it forward. There's no time for anybody to actually left to adapt to what we might have recommended, and therefore we sort of missed the opportunity to actually recommend. Well, we have recommended, but because no officer has actually looked at it or taken on board or actually agreed, we can discuss it there in the room, but sometimes we put these things forward, and in effect it would be nice if there was some sort of acknowledgement to it, like say Falls, some of the work that's gone on there, some things are left and then they go to the executive and actually there's no evidence because there's no backup system. So I feel at times some of the recommendations sort of drift off. They are perhaps picked up on in terms of here, but there's certainly no sort of very little sort of actions because there's not a lot of time left to adapt. I can discuss that later. And my other question really is perhaps to sort of Debbie is that on that community-based services and things is that when you look at sort of adults and you stand back a bit, and you could actually reflect this right across the whole council, is we go out and commission quite a lot of services, and then the people that we commission the services to actually then go out and rent a building somewhere completely different and off-site from ours, not aligned to any sort of community structure or hub or anything else, and paying rent to somebody else outside the organisation. And when you sort of start looking at it, we've got a lot of sort of, in effect, outside providers paying rent to outside people, and then we actually perhaps could really sort of provide a better source of not sort of having all this money go, council money, back out to paying private sector rents, when actually we could have them more back on a more hub style, or as we keep referring to, the one Lincolnshire public estate. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Councillor Murphy. I think that's a really important point, and I think there's pockets of good examples. I think the children's centres are a good example. I think the recent contract that we've done in terms of the back office recommissioning arrangements around utilising the Lincoln campus has helped. But I completely agree. I think there's something that we could do much more systemic. So that's something that I think we'll take offline. And I think your first point as well around how we really take the recommendations of scrutiny and progress them, given the sort of timeline for them formal decision, again, I think is just something that we'll take away. And the point that I thought you were going to ask me about around the intermediate care is just to confirm really to Councillor Lee that we do recognise that there's quite a fragmented approach to intermediate care across the health and care sector, and that's one of the priority projects that Julie, the new AD, is leading on at the moment.
Thank you for that, Debbie. Councillor Carrington, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I wanted to refer, it's on page 75 of the agenda at the top, to an item on health scrutiny on the 17th of July meeting, which is the use of planning mitigation funding for NHS facilities. It might just be of interest to your members to know that at North Kesteven, where I'm dual-hatted, we actually had a task and finish group on this, I think in late 2018, running into early 2019. And I chaired that. And one of the things that became very evident, and one of the people who gave evidence to us was Sarah Jane, who's coming along to your meeting along with Jackie Bunce, who again will be known to many involved in primary care. One of the things that became very evident to me, and I actually took us out of formal session, was that really the NHS, and 3 simple letters, hundreds of organisations behind those letters, didn't really understand the planning system, and the planning system really didn't understand the NHS. And what I got people to agree, because we were running up to the 29 election, was that after that, we'd all sit down in a room together with like a big pad and no rules and no agenda, and just share and see what we could develop. Out of that started a process which actually changed the way that planning gain is handled in this county. And together with some changes which we lobbied for and were made by central government, it actually increased the potential. We found that most LPAs were getting most of the money they should, but it increased the potential gain to the NHS primary care sector by perhaps 20 to 25%, which is a significant amount and a much more flexible way of applying it. So that might be a lesson your members are interested in looking into. I also would say that if you're going to investigate this in depth more than just having a report, do get in touch with some of the local planning authorities, because the way that system, and I, as interest declared, work in that sector, but the way that system works is now much better than it was. But it is always incredibly important, particularly when developers are finding all sorts of other competing claims, be it for transport improvements, particularly with biodiversity net gain now, which are very expensive. Making sure that all of those can be accommodated and that health gets its due slice is incredibly important. So I really look forward to listening into that item in July. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for those comments. Are there any further comments from the board on these 2 reports? No. So I will now thank you all for those comments and thank the presenters for the detailed reports. And I move that the board's satisfaction of the work undertaken be recorded and the board endorse the work programmes as these have been developed to date. Can you raise your hand if you agree, please? Thank you. That is unanimous. So item 13 and the final item on the agenda is the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board work programme, and this report is on pages 77 to 90 of the pack and provides an overview of the contents of our own work programme. We do not normally debate this item, and our action is to note its contents. Therefore, I move that the report be noted with a caveat of necessary amendments identified since the publication of this agenda, which will be incorporated by a designated scrutiny officer. Can you please raise your hand if you agree, please? Thank you. That is also unanimous. So at 11:05, I will close the meeting. Thank you.